The coffee shop smelled like vanilla and rain when Adrian slid the folder across the table. His fingers drummed against the wood surface, a nervous rhythm I had never heard before. "We need to talk about protecting our futures," he said. I watched his jaw tighten as he spoke. Something felt wrong. My name is Corinne Ellis, and I was 42 years old the day my fiancé asked me to sign away rights to a fortune he didn't know I had already given him. I didn't argue. I didn't cry or slam my hands on the table like women do in movies. I simply nodded and pulled the document toward me. Adrian's shoulders relaxed instantly. He smiled that crooked smile I used to love, the one that made strangers trust him in meetings. "You understand, right? It's just smart business," he said. I signed my name at the bottom without reading it twice. What he saw as weakness was actually clarity. Adrian stood and kissed my forehead like I was a child who had just agreed to eat vegetables. "I knew you'd get it," he whispered. Then he left to meet his business partners for lunch. I sat alone at the table, staring at my signature. The barista asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head. What I needed couldn't be ordered from a menu. I needed him to remember who I was before he became who he is now. That night, Adrian came home late, smelling like expensive wine and confidence. He talked about expansion plans and new investors like they were love letters. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues who praised his vision. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water I had forgotten to drink. He didn't notice me standing there. He hadn't noticed me in months. Success had made him blind to everything except his own reflection. I thought back to 4 years ago when Adrian was a struggling consultant working from our tiny apartment in Brooklyn. The radiator clanked at night, and the ceiling had a water stain shaped like California. He had brilliant ideas, but no connections. Real talent, but no platform to showcase it. I watched him send out dozens of proposals that came back rejected or ignored completely. One night, I found him asleep at the kitchen table, his face pressed against a spreadsheet covered in coffee rings. I covered him with a blanket and stood there watching him breathe. That's when I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I decided to help him without him ever knowing it was me. The company was called Blue Line Strategies, a boutique consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring. I had inherited it from my late Uncle Maxwell, along with 3 rental properties in Manhattan and a diverse investment portfolio I never mentioned to anyone, not even my closest friends. Adrian didn't know I owned anything beyond my used Honda and the second-hand furniture in my apartment. I had always lived simply by choice, worked a regular office job that paid the bills, and actively avoided conversations about money or inheritance. It wasn't a secret exactly. It was just something I never felt the need to advertise. Wealth made people act differently around you, treat you like a bank instead of a person. I didn't want that. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. I called my business manager, Howard Chen, who had worked with my uncle for 15 years and knew how to be discreet. "Make it look completely legitimate," I said during our phone call. "No special treatment. No obvious favors. Just get his proposal on the right desk in front of the right people." 3 weeks later, Adrian burst through our apartment door, waving a contract above his head like a victory flag. "They want me," he shouted, his voice cracking with joy. Blue Line Strategies had hired him as a senior consultant with a generous starting salary. He spun me around the living room, laughing and kissing my face. I laughed with him, my heart full of love and hope. He never asked how they found him or why they chose his proposal over hundreds of others. Success felt too good to question. I should have realized then that he would never give me credit, even if he knew the truth. Adrian rose quickly inside the company. 6 months in, he was leading projects. A year later, he was managing entire teams. His salary tripled. His confidence grew with every promotion. I watched it happen from the sidelines, proud and invisible. He started wearing designer suits and attending networking events where people called him brilliant. At home, he talked less and scrolled more. Our conversations shrank to logistics. His success became the third person in our relationship. By year 2, Adrian stopped asking about my day. He assumed I had nothing interesting to report. I worked a basic admin job at a law firm, came home at 5, cooked dinner. What could possibly be exciting about that? He didn't know I spent my lunch breaks reviewing financial reports for my properties. He didn't know I was planning to retire at 50. He didn't know anything about the woman he claimed to love. He only knew the version of me he had decided existed. When Adrian proposed, it felt like checking a box on a to-do list, rather than a moment of genuine emotion. We were at an expensive French restaurant he chose without asking my preference. The ring was beautiful, a platinum band with a single diamond that caught the light. He gave a rehearsed speech about partnership and building a future together, about being each other's support system through life's challenges. But even as he spoke these lovely words, his eyes kept drifting to his phone on the table, checking messages from work colleagues who apparently couldn't survive an hour without his input. I said yes, because I still believed the old Adrian existed somewhere underneath all the expensive polish and corporate confidence. I thought marriage might bring him back to me, remind him of who we used to be. I was so incredibly wrong. The prenup 3 months later proved that. The prenup wasn't about protecting money. It was about control and power. I read it 3 times alone in the apartment after he left the coffee shop that day. It stated that all premarital assets would remain completely separate property. Any business interests developed during the marriage would belong exclusively to whoever created them. Spousal support was capped at exactly 2 years maximum, regardless of circumstances. The document was written like Adrian expected to be the only one with anything worth protecting, like I was just a simple office worker with nothing to my name. The irony burned in my chest like acid. He had no idea that everything he was so carefully protecting, every asset and opportunity and success, had originally come from me. I was protecting him from myself, and he didn't even know it. I made my decision that same afternoon. I wouldn't tell him the truth. Not about the company, not about the properties, not about the investments that made his salary look like pocket change. I would let him believe his own story. I would let him think he built his empire with nothing but talent and hard work. And then I would watch what happened when the foundation he didn't know existed started to crumble. I wasn't angry. I was just finished being invisible. The first withdrawal was small. I called Howard and asked him to delay Adrian's promotion. Nothing obvious, I told him. Just slow things down. A week later, Adrian came home, frustrated. The senior director position he expected went to someone else. They said they need more time to evaluate candidates, he muttered. I touched his shoulder. You'll get the next one, I said. He shrugged me off and poured himself bourbon. He drank alone in his office while I sat in the living room reading a book he would never ask about. The second withdrawal came a month later, when Adrian needed an introduction to a major client for a potential 7-figure contract. He had been talking about it for weeks, convinced this deal would cement his reputation and prove his value to the company leadership. I knew the client personally through my investment network, had sat across from him at charity dinners and quarterly portfolio reviews. One phone call from me and Adrian would have had his meeting within days, probably within hours. I didn't make the call. Instead, I sat quietly and watched him prepare pitch after pitch, send email after email, each one completely ignored by the client's office. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong, he said one night, staring at his laptop screen. I'm doing everything right. I have the perfect proposal. I nodded sympathetically and rubbed his shoulders. Inside, I felt absolutely nothing. Sympathy requires believing someone deserves better. Adrian deserved exactly what he was getting. By month 3, the delays were piling up. Projects stalled, meetings were rescheduled, opportunities that used to fall into Adrian's lap suddenly required more effort. He started working later, coming home exhausted and irritable. He snapped at me over small things like dinner being late or the apartment being too quiet. I absorbed his frustration without reacting. He mistook my calm for indifference. He didn't realize indifference was the point. I had stopped caring whether he succeeded or failed. I had only cared that he see me. He never did. Adrian started second-guessing himself. He reviewed old projects, looking for mistakes. He asked colleagues for feedback. He bought books on leadership and left them stacked on the coffee table, spines uncracked. One night, he pulled out the prenup and read through it again. I watched him from the doorway. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. "This is still a good idea, right?" he asked without looking up. "Absolutely," I said. He nodded, reassured. He still believed he was the one with something to lose. Month 5 brought the real cracks. Adrian lost a major project to a competitor. His boss called him into a meeting and questioned his recent performance. He came home that night looking 10 years older. "I don't know what's happening," he said. His voice broke on the last word. I made him tea and sat beside him on the couch. He leaned his head on my shoulder like he used to when we first met. For a moment, I considered telling him everything. Then he pulled away and checked his phone. The moment passed. So did my sympathy. Adrian started asking strange questions. "Do you think I got lucky?" he said one morning over coffee. I looked up from my toast. "What do you mean?" I asked. "With the job, with everything. Do you think it was luck or skill?" He studied my face like he was searching for clues. I kept my expression neutral. "Does it matter?" I replied. He didn't answer, but I saw the doubt settle into his eyes. Doubt is a quiet killer. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves in and makes itself comfortable until there's no room left for confidence. I watched Adrian try to fix things himself. He networked harder. He worked longer hours. He sent emails at midnight and showed up to meetings early. Nothing worked. The connections that used to open doors were suddenly busy. The clients who used to return his calls went silent. He was working twice as hard for half the results. It was exhausting to watch. But I didn't intervene. This was his lesson to learn. Success built on someone else's foundation will always collapse when that foundation shifts. He just hadn't figured out yet that I was the foundation. The biggest blow came exactly 6 months after he made me sign the prenup. Blue Line Strategies announced they were eliminating Adrian's entire department during a company-wide restructuring initiative. He received a severance package equivalent to 3 months' salary and a polite letter thanking him for his contributions and wishing him well in his future endeavors. I found him sitting alone in his home office that evening, still wearing his suit from the meeting, staring at the termination letter like it was written in a language he couldn't comprehend. The paper shook slightly in his hands. "They let me go," he whispered, his voice hollow and broken. "After everything I did for them. After all the success I brought them." I stood in the doorway holding grocery bags, watching this man I once loved crumble. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, and I genuinely was. Not sorry that it happened, sorry that it took this long for him to realize he wasn't untouchable. That success built on borrowed foundations always collapses eventually. Adrian spiraled quickly after that. He sent out resumes to dozens of companies and heard nothing back. His confidence evaporated. He stopped wearing suits and spent days in sweatpants scrolling through job boards. His phone stopped buzzing with messages from admirers. The silence in our apartment grew thick and heavy. One afternoon, he looked at me with desperation in his eyes. "How did you use to make things happen for me?" he asked. I froze. My heart pounded. This was the closest he had ever come to seeing the truth. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. He shook his head. "Nothing, never mind." I wanted to shake him. I wanted to scream that I gave him everything, and he threw it back in my face with a prenup designed to protect himself from me. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "Things change, Adrian. Sometimes the world stops working in your favor. That's just life." He stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. Then he turned back to his laptop and kept scrolling. He was looking for answers in all the wrong places. The answer was standing right in front of him. It had been there the whole time. He just refused to see it. Within 3 months, Adrian was broke. The savings he had built during his successful years disappeared into rent and bills. He sold the designer suits. He canceled subscriptions. His entire identity was tied to success, and now that success was gone, he didn't know who he was anymore. The prenup sat in a drawer, useless. It protected assets that no longer existed. It promised security that had always been an illusion. He had insisted on a document that separated our futures. Now his future had separated itself from him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning. Adrian didn't fight it. He signed the papers without reading them. The same way I had signed the prenup. He moved out 2 weeks later, taking only what fit in his car. As I watched him load boxes, I felt something strange. Not sadness, not regret, just a quiet sense of completion. This chapter was over. He looked back at me once before driving away. "I never understood you," he said. I nodded. "I know," I replied. That was the truest thing either of us had said in years. 6 months after the divorce, I sold my admin job and took over Blue Line Strategies officially. I walked into the building I secretly owned and introduced myself to employees who had once reported to Adrian. Some recognized my last name from company documents, others didn't. I rebuilt the company with transparency and respect, values Adrian never understood. I hired people who deserved opportunities and gave them real support. And sometimes late at night, I thought about the woman who signed a prenup to protect a man who never saw her. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who finally understood that the most dangerous thing you can do is make yourself invisible. Because eventually, you disappear completely. And when you come back, the world won't recognize the power you've been hiding all along.